You only have one brain, and just because you get hit in the head and you don't show the symptoms of a concussion doesn't mean that you're perfectly fine.
Hello and welcome into Suns Out Stangs Out Radio Western Summer Western Mustangs Sports Show. My name is Alex McComb and I'm your host. This is number 8. This is episode number 8 of the show, and I'm joined by Western football alum turned head injury researcher Jeff Brooks. Jeff, it's nice seeing you again since our last time together when you used to get those probes on my head and I got to stare at a dot for a few years. Thanks for joining the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Alex.
So, Jeff, you started out as a DB, a defensive back, and moved to linebacker partway through your career. What drove that switch and how'd that transition feel?
Honestly, I'd say what drove the switch for the most part was the fact on how well we got fed as football players, and so the amount of mass that continued to accumulate on my body. I came in as a small high schooler in DB size, and within my first year put on about 20 pounds, and I think I put on another 20 pounds over the next couple of years. So that natural increase in mass slowed me down. And so I moved to linebacker, and the transition was, I'd say, scary a bit at first. I was used to being a DB who liked to watch for the ball, was more of a ball hawk player, and linebacker, I didn't know if I had the physical mentality to take on, big offensive linemen while also dropping into coverage. But we had some great coaches that helped with that transition, as well as just the linebacking crew that I kind of joined in, some leaders there who, gave me the pointers, gave me the tips, and I really came to enjoy and love that position.
Sounds similar to the reason why I switched from linebacker to fullback. I gained a few pounds in that area because I came in 2016 as a rookie, tied with Lawson as the heaviest linebacker. So that definitely drove that switch to offense. And I also, speaking of meals, I live across the street from Marshall's Pasta. So that I've been reminiscing about those Wednesdays after practice.
Absolutely.
Take us back to your recruiting days. What made Western the choice coming out of London Central?
For me, I grew up in London. So as a kid, I'd go to the Western football games. So Western was kind of the shining star of university football. So it wasn't really much of a decision amongst other schools. I certainly applied to other schools from a education standpoint, but from a football standpoint, I think Western was the only school that at that point recruiting wasn't as big of a thing. So we came in, I think we got tickets to one free game, got a couple free hot dogs, and shown around the locker room and whatnot. But it was just always, it was a hometown feel. Always dreamt of putting on the purple uniform, and it was a pretty easy decision, especially once I got accepted into the program I was in at the time.
What was the day-to-day like as a student athlete, balancing football with school and your research especially?
It's interesting coming from like London Central in high school. Back then, I don't think it is anymore, but back then it was a day 1, day 2 cycle. So we actually juggled 6 to 8 courses throughout the school year. So coming into first year, what I see with a lot of other students and what other teammates experienced from a time management perspective wasn't as difficult for me because I was actually going to less classes, but obviously university classes a bit more content heavy. So the time management wasn't too difficult. We were obviously limited in when we can take certain classes just so that you didn't miss practices or anything of that sort. But I was in at math and then physics. So most of my classes were morning or early afternoon anyway. So I didn't really have much of a conflict issue. The more difficult part was certainly when I went into my grad studies, because you have a lot more free time to do your research. It is a lot less structured. There's basically 0 classes. So you make your own schedule. So had to be a lot more disciplined. And what I thought, after playing for 5 years throughout my undergrad, that I couldn't spend any more time at the stadium, I ended up almost doubling my time with my research because I had to be there 2 hours ahead of practice, making sure all the equipment and everything was set up. Then I'd be there throughout practice, recording and collecting data, and then I'd be there after practice, pretty much as long as the guys were still in film and eating dinner and whatnot, as I'm then downloading all the data that we collected and then making sure things are ready for the next day.
Every team has that guy or that moment. What's the funniest thing you remember from your years in the Mustangs locker room? Any funny stories there?
There's certainly a lot of funny stories. Some of them more appropriate, some of them less appropriate to share. But certainly we had some players just a lot of funny things are just like interactions that were kind of funny in the moment, whether it's interactions with other players or with coaches. Sometimes a smart remark in video that caused Coach Gleason to pause and reflect and get a smile out of him was always good. I can recall usually it's when a veteran who obviously has a working relationship with the coaches can sneak in the snide remark. Those were always good for a chuckle. I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity like that where we were watching practice film and we were late to get the call on the field. And so the play was botched and the offense, I think, scored a touchdown on it. And Coach Gleason wasn't too happy with us for that. And I spoke up to say that, so I used the words around something like, with all due respect, Coach, the play call came in a little late, so we didn't get the chance to set up. And I remember Coach Gleason at the time looked to a rookie beside him and said, "You see that? That's how you address your seniors when you want, or your coaches when you want to make sure that you're telling them that they screwed up." And it was a bit of a deep breath moment because I wasn't sure how he was going to take that feedback, but just an example of how you get so close with your teammates and your coaches and can make even learn from mistakes, but still have fun during it.
I still remember watching film in my first year, I think, first or second year, and Coach Marshall had joined the defensive room for some film, and we were watching Carleton, and it was all silent, and we were watching and we watched a Carleton play where one of their defensive ends got a sack, and he had a sack celebration. We were all watching it, and Coach Marshall goes, "The K in Carleton stands for quality education." And that was the first time I had heard that joke, but yeah, that was pretty good. And he was always known for cracking a few jokes every so often whenever I was in offensive or defensive meeting rooms. But any game or single play from your career that still lives in your head, good or bad?
Certainly play. We were at home playing, I think it was Laurier. It was like a rainy game. And I was in, and, our coaches, especially Coach Gleason, is so good at prepping us. We always, knew ahead of time, when they're in this formation, they're likely to do this play or this play. And it was like perfect. All the football gods came together. They were in a certain formation. I read the play perfectly, kind of dropped under for the pass, had the pick in my hands. I was already looking towards the end zone, and then the ball proceeded to fall right through my hands and I dropped it and still got the stat of a pass breakup. But really it was, I think in our report cards at the game later, I was docked marks because it was just a missed interception. So that one still kind of haunts me. But from positive plays or positive games, playing, certainly winning the Yates Cup at home against Queens. The next game when we went to Calgary and got whooped on an icy field, that would be a not so great memory. And then from a research perspective, I still got to follow the team for another 4 years after I stopped playing. And, I was there for in Laval. Well, I got to go out east when they won the UTEC Bowl against Acadia,
Acadia, yeah.
and then Laval for the Vanier. And then even being there the following year when they lost in the Vanier, it was still great experiences to be in. So yeah, I've got lots of overall great positive experiences that stick with me from my memories.
I still remember a certain, I won't say too much, but a certain memory of Jordan Beaulieu at the airport after that UTEC Bowl. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but who were the teammates or the coaches who left the biggest mark on you on or off the field?
um, Coaches, I think for myself coming in, I was very diligent about my workout routines. So coming under the tutelage of Jeff Watson and experiencing his outlook on strength and conditioning was quite enlightening. And to this day, I still have hundreds of football workouts that I recorded, during my time, like wrote down during my time of playing, and I still reflect back on them and use them on my day-to-day workouts. Maybe not to the same intensity, certainly not the same um, level of weights that I was lifting, but it still keeps me active. Then from positional coaching, Coach PJ, when he's coaching DBs, and when I was a DB, he was always a positive influence. And then certainly Coach Gleason being on the defensive side, just seeing his approach to his approach to his like coaching philosophy. He is very um, big on preparing players and the team for their opponents. Being able to sit in on his Friday, I almost call them lectures, but they're more like history lessons where he would relate some moment in history or some certain person or group of people in history to the upcoming game. Was always so cool. And I could certainly see the teacher in him coming out at that point, and could only imagine what it would be like to actually sit in his classes as a student and be able to experience that. But I was and just experiencing it as a player was certainly great too. And then obviously playing under Coach Marshall and seeing his just kind of recipe for success, his ability to put the right players in the right positions, and his coaching staff working together, seeing that year after year. So all great coaches to have experience with. Players, I mean, there's countless players to have been under. I mean, my very first year was the last year of current coach Michael Faulds when he was a quarterback for the team. So I did get to experience Coach or Faulds as a player. And what stuck out with me was, I was a nobody rookie. And I remember being in the weight room the one time, and Faulds was in there working out, and he knew my name. He was encouraging with me. And we ended up finishing a workout together, and that really stuck with me as someone who he appreciated every person excuse me, every person on the team, whether they were the shining star or the new rookie who's still, he recognizes that everyone contributes. um and then yeah, I could name countless guys. Let's see, we've got like guys like Pavel Kruba, being a linebacker. He was a solid leader. We had some guys who were kind of more the quiet leaders, where they just perform on the field or they're performing in the weight room. Um, let's see, guys like Bo Landry. We had, sheesh, just like kind of overwhelmed with players. We had Matt Norman as an offensive lineman, who was a great kind of more of those quiet leader types. Greg Wilson as well. DBs, we had Aaron Hanser, Craig Butler. And then even seeing players, which I kind of appreciated, was players who maybe they were the younger players when I finished playing, but then I got to see them kind of grow up to be more of the leaders of the team as I was still conducting research with them. So guys like Dave Mackey, Nick Vannon, Mackenzie Ferguson, all guys. I'm certainly a defensive biased here from my playing days on the team, but those were all really key players to see their that I was fortunate to see their whole progression, I'd say, through their career.
Looking back now as someone who studies head impacts for a living, is there a hit from your own playing days that you think about differently today?
100%. It's the kind of story I always go to when people find out I conduct research on head impacts. They always immediately say, "Oh, concussions. Did you ever have a concussion?" And I was never diagnosed with a concussion, but I distinctly recall a game against McMaster. We were on kickoff cover, and I came down the field and had to break up the wedge, and I went head on head with another player. And at the time, didn't think much of it. I came off the field, but everything was a weird shade of blue, and lasted for 2 to 3 minutes until went back on the field for, I don't know, I think it was like a punt cover or something like that, or punt return. But looking back on it now and knowing what I know now, that is an example of what was quite likely a concussion, having symptoms like that. So I would say that is the big hit that has stuck with me and from my research experience with my research.
I still remember one practice where I came off the field. I can't remember exactly what my symptoms were, but we went into the locker room to go, and you checked my numbers for me for G-force, and you mentioned two numbers, and they were two impacts, I believe, within a minute or 30 seconds of each other, and it was 55 Gs and then 60 Gs. And I had a conversation with Dr. Charles Tatter a few years ago when I was working for CBC, and he had mentioned to me that the threshold for loss of consciousness is around 50. So that kind of scared me a little bit, even, whatever it was, 5-6 years after the impact. So that was probably my biggest impact, because I've never been diagnosed with a concussion. I've only ever had ankle injuries in my career. So but that's one of my biggest memories of you doing research, particularly with me. But I want to know what actually got you interested in concussion science and head impacts. Was there a specific was there a teammate's experience? Maybe was there maybe an injury that pulled you in that direction? I know we kind of went over that a little bit, but was there any thing that really pulled you in early in your career?
I'd say it was a bit of luck in that some things kind of came together at the right time, and then just my own interests. So my undergrad was in physics, and I really liked the math side of things. I liked the kinematics, so speed, velocity, acceleration. I didn't so much like dealing with either really small particles or thinking like astronomy and really big planets. I liked something in the middle. And so in my last year playing, or actually no, it was my second last year playing, a veteran on the team, Cody Campbell, who was a former fullback, he had actually started this study where he had put a bunch of accelerometers, so small helmet devices inside, kind of on the inside of all players' helmets, and he was measuring their head kinematics, which is things like how fast the head's moving, so the linear velocity, the rotational velocity, so how fast the head rotates on head impacts, and then linear acceleration, so that's the G's that you're talking about, which is how quickly the head accelerates in a linear direction. And he was there after practice kind of downloading the data, and I had a sensor in my helmet, and I was also just really interested in that work at the time. And so over the course of that season, I got more familiar with the project. And then So I was kind of graduating. We'd come down to like March or April of that year, and Cody approached me saying he was moving on to complete his PhD at University of North Carolina, and they were looking for someone to take over the project, and if I would be interested. And at that point, I hadn't really thought of what my next steps were after graduating undergrad. So stepping into a master's where I got to conduct research, still be working with the football team, working on football players. And at that time, concussions were kind of exploding as a big topic. That was around then was when that concussion movie with Will Smith came out. The NFL was under fire with the media around what they called the concussion crisis. And I had experienced or seen other teammates experience concussions that were certainly concerning. Like, guys would be suddenly get really emotional after the game or something, and it seemed really odd. Either they're really angry or they're crying or whatever the case is. And at that point, I had gotten to know more that those were likely symptoms of a concussion. So kind of all those things falling together, I was fortunate enough to be able to take over that study, and then for the next 6 years conducted it myself, 2 years with my master's and then 4 years with my PhD. So that's kind of how it came into being, and I ended up really enjoying research, and that's why I continue to do it to this day.
There was a show you were on in 2017 where you talked about the idea of tracking total hit counts instead of just individual concussion diagnoses. Can you explain that shift in thinking for people who assume no concussion equals no problem?
Yeah, certainly. So, I think early on the focus was, and I mean, there still should be a focus on concussion because, it is a very serious injury that needs to be addressed properly, and making sure people recover properly. You only have one brain, and it's what allows you to function on the day to day. But for myself and certainly other researchers, the idea that just because you get hit in the head and you don't show the symptoms of a concussion doesn't mean that you're perfectly fine. And especially in contact or collision sports where you're getting repetitive impacts to the head, each of those head impacts likely causes some sort of damage, just at a scale that we're not able to measure or able to see. So then the idea around a hit count, which would be similar to like a pitch count in baseball, where coaches or trainers are counting every time a pitcher throws the ball, and then they get to a certain point and they say, okay, you got to stop for the day because you're likely to put yourself at risk of injury. Same kind of idea with a hit count, where if we have an idea that, and this could be a threshold that's different for each player, where, okay, you've experienced this many head impacts over this short period of time to take it easy. Maybe you're going to just helmet off and you're just participating in kind of individual drills or anything that's non-contact related until you're given time to recover. And I don't think we're necessarily at that stage yet in the research, but that is one area or one kind of place we can focus on to try to make the game or sports a little safer for athletes playing it.
I believe it was your 2022 paper on Western football players. You tracked over 127,000 head impacts across 63 players over multiple seasons. I believe the average number of career impacts was 2,000 across all positions. When you first calculated that number, what was your reaction?
I think just because I had been kind of in the trenches, both as a player and then as a researcher, I wasn't too surprised. But if I were to think back on it as before I knew what I knew in my research, that is a large number. I think as a player, you don't necessarily, you're not sitting there thinking every time you hit your head, you're not counting yourself and thinking like, oh, this practice I just took on 50 head impacts, or this game I had 100. But then when you sit back and think like, wow, 2,000, and that's just on average. So, we certainly had some players in that cohort who were on the lower end, which would have brought the average down. And then we had some players who were well over 2,000. Like, I think the more interesting part is actually looking at position wise, because guys like offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and linebackers were averaging closer to 3,000, 3,500 head impacts over that career. And some of them, 1,000 head impacts just into one season. And hitting your head over and over like that, because it's so gradual and you kind of grow accustomed to it, you may not notice the changes. But then if you look at, maybe from when you came in as a young rookie to when you're leaving as a career veteran, what are all those effects having on your brain? And then it's tough to tease out too when you have so many other factors coming into play, like your general cognitive fatigue from being in school all that time and studying, other things at play, food, nutrition, social, your choices in your kind of social lives. So it's interesting, but can be a difficult exact science to tease out, cause and effect. And instead, we're looking more just at relational associations.
Can you explain how you conducted that study, especially with the technology you had, for people who weren't in that locker room, and anything else that you found interesting?
Sure. So over the years, we actually used quite a few different measures. The one aspect was just the collection of the head impact data. So that stayed the same throughout all 6 years. We used these head sensors, the G-Force tracker. They were a Toronto-based company that we worked with closely. A great group of people that were very supportive of our research, as was Coach Marshall, who allowed us to work with the team over all those seasons. But that is only kind of one side of the story. That tells us the input, how many head impacts athletes are taking. But then we wanted to find out, okay, what effect are these head impacts having on the players? So that's where we incorporated quite a few different measures of brain outcomes. We started using what's called EEG, or electroencephalography, where players would wear basically like swim caps that had electrodes in them. And we could use those electrodes to measure the brain power when they're doing kind of simple tasks. And so we did that for, I think, 2, maybe 3 seasons. But that had some limitations around one. It took about 25 minutes to 30 minutes per player to conduct. And when we're trying to get, especially if we want to get the entire team, so all 100 to 110 guys through, that's a lot of time. So we moved to a different brain outcome measure, which we're measuring what's called your saccadic eye movements, which is day to day, your eyes move, they dart back and forth, as we're looking at a screen, as we're reading a book, as you're just walking down the street, your eyes are always moving. And those short little movements say a lot about how your brain is functioning. And there were 2 main movements that we were concerned about: prosaccades, which is just your movement towards the stimulus. So that's when, someone's talking to you and you look towards them, or you suddenly hear a sound, to your right and you look to the right. That eye movement is your basic reaction time. Then that we had what was called your antisaccades. So that is your ability to inhibit your looking at a stimulus and instead looking the other way. So that has a little bit more of a brain process to it. So I think the description that I used that resonated with the players was if you're walking down the street and you see an attractive person go by, you would look, kind of automatically look at them. That is a prosaccade. If you're walking down the street with your partner and you see an attractive person go by, you're going to look in the other direction so you don't get into any trouble. So that would be an antisaccade. And so what we did is we set up a light board in the kind of just outside the change room, and we'd have guys sit down. We'd put electrodes on either side of their eyes, and they would either perform a prosaccade, so they'd be looking straight at the light board, and on the right or left, a light would blink, and they would have to look towards that light and then come back as quickly as possible. And the electrodes on either sides of their eyes allowed us to measure how quickly they reacted to the light and then the magnitude. So kind of the what I say, I guess the accuracy in which they were looking in that direction. And then we also had anti-saccades where the light would blink and they would have to stop their urge to look at it instead looking in the other direction. And so we did that for, I think, 3 or 4 years of collection there, where we're measuring it at different time points in the season. And then we're relating their latency, so their reaction time, to the number of head impacts that they experienced during practices and games or up to that time point. So that was a really interesting portion of the study, I thought, where we had our head impacts and then the brain outcomes, and kind of married those two to see what effects that were going on with the players' brains.
Yeah, I was looking at that one as well, that saccade study, and actually just remembering back, I was in second year university when we started doing that, for myself at least, and I was in kinesiology and I happened to be learning about pro-saccade and anti-saccade anyways, so it was nice to see that in application in practice. But and yeah, believe you found that players' brains hadn't fully reset between first season and second season. Reaction time was was worse, I believe, at the start of year 2 than at year 1, even without anyone being diagnosed with a concussion. What can you tell me about some of those resulting numbers, if you recall?
Yeah, I think there were two kind of main outcomes from that analysis. One was over the course of the season, players' reaction times did slow down, and I think I don't remember the exact number. I want to say it was something like, it was a little under 20%. I want to say, and I kind of broken that down to the difference between at the beginning of the season, if you are whether you're on offense or defense, and you have the player across from you, kind of gives you a juke or a fake in some way. You can react to it pretty quickly, recover, still make the play. When we get to the end of the season and that same play were to happen, because you are that almost 20% slower, you can't recover in that amount of time. And especially at the speed of what players play at, then that could be the result between a successful and an unsuccessful play. So that was kind of the big takeaway I thought of from a performance perspective. So not even thinking of the obvious implications of your brain is not working to its potential, which isn't good from a health perspective. But if you're actually looking at it from just performance, then that is of concern, whether you're a coach or an athlete. And then, the second part is, so you accumulate all these head impacts in the season, you're done, let's say, fingers crossed, end of November, you get all the way to the Vanier, and then you have until basically the beginning of August, so about 9 months of rest, of reduced, if not no hitting, depending on kind of the training going on, off-season training. You would hope, or you would expect, that any deficits may recover by that next over those 9 months. But we what we noticed was that when we measured the baseline levels in that second season, they still had not come back to their baseline levels from the previous season. So that's telling us that these effects are, we don't know if they're permanent to the point of affecting you over your entire career or lifespan, but just in that 1 or 2 seasons, they are affecting you long enough that you're kind of at a disadvantage by that second season.
Yeah, kickoffs have been a large topic of discussion when it comes to football head impacts, especially with the NFL going to a dynamic kickoff structure, and maybe leagues possibly following suit in the future. But your hammer and nail paper really talked about kickoff specifically, and the impact that they had compared to other plays, versus, special teams versus offense and defense. What's actually happening biomechanically on a kickoff that might make it much more dangerous than a normal play?
Certainly. So we were fortunate over a couple of years of this study that some researchers at Queen's University also had were using the G-force trackers in their players' helmets. So that allowed us to conduct this analysis where we were looking at players on both sides of the ball. So kickoff and kick return in those games where Queens is playing Western. And we could see the difference between a player hitting another player and, what we called that's where I called the hammer and the nail. So the person delivering the hit versus the person receiving the hit. And we could see if, the person delivering their hit had this amount of linear acceleration or rotational velocity on their head impact, what was going on in the person receiving it. And what we noticed was, especially on kickoffs, regardless of whether you are hitting or receiving, your kinematics, so your linear acceleration and rotational velocity and rotational acceleration, were much higher than in other plays. And that is likely due to the fact that on kickoff, especially with the kickoff that is currently performed now in U Sports and in Canadian football, is you've got guys running down the field full force. They've got like a 40-yard run up before anyone makes contact with them. So they've got a full head of steam. You've got the defensive guys who can't get as much of a run up because they have to prepare themselves to be blocking for the returner. So they're kind of taking the brunt of that force. So because you have such high speeds and such high move, so many people moving in such a tight area, that's, I think, why we're seeing some of those high numbers. And there've been some other studies examining the kinematics between play types, and even in American football, college football especially, who still, I believe, do that classic kickoff. They're seeing that same thing where you have those bigger closing distances between players, allows for more force production and then higher velocities and accelerations on head impact.
I believe during the canceled 2020 season, you can no longer form a wedge in U Sports. I was a middle wedge guy back during my career. I don't know if you were part of that unit, but what other changes would you recommend to U Sports when it comes to kickoff specifically? Is there, I believe in the NCAA, if you can fair catch anywhere within the 25-yard line, I believe. Is that something that U Sports should think about?
It's interesting. So in my kind of moonlighting on top of my grad studies, I have worked with a national nonprofit, Concussion Legacy Foundation Canada, and we were fortunate to we were asked by a private high school league in kind of the New Jersey, New York area, in partnership with our American counterparts, Concussion Legacy Foundation, to assess and then give suggestions to their league, because they were seeing a drop in participation and there was a real concern, especially among parents, around head injuries. So we talked with a lot of the coaches, the administrators, some parents, some officials, and some athletes, kind of did an assessment on the league and then gave some suggestions. And one of the suggestions that we gave was actually removal of the kickoff entirely. And then we also suggested on their punts that they should adopt the Canadian style, where you have to give the 5-yard radius so that players aren't kind of teeing off on the punt returner. We gave some suggestions on strict hitting time limits during the week, so that practice, I think we gave something like 20 minutes of hitting over an entire week, rather than dedicating 20 minutes every practice, to again try to reduce those head impacts. And overall, you're reducing the opportunity or exposure to potential concussion. And the league adopted some of the suggestions and not some of the others, but one of the ones they did adopt was the removal of the kickoff. And from the feedback that we got afterwards, because we interviewed a lot of those same people again, was on the first week or two, there was kind of like outrage amongst parents watching it, being like, what the heck? This isn't football. There's no kickoff. But by the end of the season, they kind of adapted and had almost forgotten about it. Coaches were also similarly concerned, like, wait a second, we don't have kickoff. that was for some of them, that was a big play, whether they had a kicker who could boot the ball and they could pin the team deep, or they had a really good returner and it was an opportunity to score. But then what they also realize is, wait a sec, now we have this extra time during practice to dedicate towards offensive plays and defensive plays and kind of more of your bread and butter. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of small experiment that seemed to end up doing well. I mean, what the NFL has is interesting, but there's still a lot of opportunity for, I'd say, kind of big hits to occur. So at least it's tough. I think at least from maybe the younger age, so maybe not at a university level, removing that kickoff wouldn't be as bad a thing. So then players can focus, or young athletes can focus more on that, those fundamentals. For youth sports or college football in general, I think at least moving towards where there's less moving people, less closing distance, we have less of a chance for those big hits and potential injury. The one that concerns me is onside kicks, because that's where players can really tee off. It's basically like what you've described with the old school wedge, but here instead you've got like 6 guys protecting the one returner behind them. You got the kickoff guys coming, running straight at them full force, and their whole job is just to get those guys out of the way. And then you got the guy hoping that he catches the ball before he gets teed off on. And I know there's been some proposals in the NFL that have come close to changing the onside kick, where instead of performing an onside kick, you perform a 4th and some distance. I think it's like a 4th and 12 has about the same conversion rate as an onside kick does. And I think from a fan excitement standpoint, that would be just as interesting, because it's still a risky play, because if you don't convert it, then the team gets the ball, right there, and they're close to your own goal line. But then you have a chance to do some of those fun, trick plays or something like that on 4th down that, you're trying to deceive the defense and get those extra 12 yards. And if you do, you keep going down the field. So same idea as an onside kick, but you don't have that potential for big head impacts and concussive injury.
When you conduct these studies, especially in youth sports with kids, how much interaction do you have with coaches and parents about the results that you find?
So especially with youth sports, we have to ethically ensure that everyone is informed on the research that we're conducting. So anyone under the age of 18 has to have parental consent. So in my postdoc, actually, we performed a similar type of study, but with youth soccer. So we instead of having sensors in helmets, obviously you're not wearing helmets in soccer. So they wore mouth guards with accelerometers in them. And all the parents were informed of the research ahead of time, and we gave them updates throughout the season and afterwards as well. And same with the coaching staff. So the coaching staff of that team was also very supportive of the research we were doing and really interested in those outcomes. So that's always good to see, is when you have that receptiveness where they're recognizing that, they don't necessarily, they know how to coach and how to develop their players. And then we can give suggestions as researchers to say, here are areas in practice where we're seeing maybe a lot of head impacts or a lot of potential for injury. So can we reduce the amount of time that players are exposed to that, or remove it entirely, change the concept of whatever that period is, but they still allow them to develop that skill that they're working on. And so for soccer specifically, we noted during practices just how the coaches were conducting certain sessions. They were exposing players to a lot of potential heading or head impacts that weren't necessarily needed. So they changed that structure and were able to reduce those numbers, which was great to see. And I think that's just an example of where you kind of have that marriage between research and then implementation of the findings of that research with whatever population you are working with.
Have you noticed a meaningful difference in how a developing brain responds to repetitive impact versus an adult brain?
Um, I would say it's hard to say with the research I've conducted. We have worked a bit, like I said, with some youth players and then some of our university football players. The thing is depends. The brain is still developing up until sometimes mid to late 20s. So it could be that our university football players were also still experiencing different stages of brain development. The kind of overarching idea I'd say around behind a lot of research is that a developing brain is a little more plastic and can adapt to these head impacts when it's younger, as opposed to someone who's older and their brain isn't as doesn't have that plasticity. However, it doesn't seem in general, I don't think exposing to a brain to head impacts is a good thing. So if we can just reduce that number as best as we can, I think that is a um, better outcome. Similarly to, you've got growing bodies, and younger athletes are less likely to experience, let's say, a knee injury like a torn ACL. However, that doesn't mean if you're going to expose that knee to lots and lots of cutting and kind of different movements, doesn't mean that kind of wear and tear over time isn't still going to take an effect.
From your studies, is there an ideal time for a youth player to start heading the ball or start hitting in hockey or start tackling in football? Is there an age group or a group that or an age that people should get to before they start doing any of that?
There isn't one specific age. I think every person is unique. However, there is certainly a push amongst different sport organizations, as well as I'd say like national organizations like Concussion Legacy Foundation, who I used to work with, both on the Canadian and American side, as well as their international partners, who have pushed towards anything under the age of 14. So kind of that starting high school level, where you don't have to, or the idea is not exposing young kids under the age of 14 to those head impacts. And I think the idea of 14 being, it has given athletes time to play that sport, focus on their fundamentals where they don't have to incorporate their heads. So in soccer, that's, working on their footwork, trapping the ball with their chest, other body parts, but they don't necessarily have to head the ball. In things like hockey, it's focusing on your stick handling, basically everything else other than body checking. In football, it could be playing flag football, again, focusing on those fundamentals. Even the act of breaking down and trying to pull the flag is similar to breaking down and then performing a tackle. So you're getting athletes into those positions as long as they're kind of coached appropriately, knowing that it's scaling up towards some sort of tackle. And similarly in rugby, you can do the same concept there. But I think allowing players to develop those fundamentals, then also get familiar with their bodies changing, and then around 14, hopefully they've gone through at least some bit of growth spurts, so they're a little bit more coordinated and able to handle themselves in a physical nature there, and then they can make a bit more of a conscious decision as, okay, do I like the sport enough that I want to expose my head to things like headers or tackling or body checking, or maybe, yeah, I tried it for a couple of years, but I didn't enjoy the sport, so instead I'm going to try a different sport. And then they haven't exposed their head to 2 years worth of head impacts at a young age when they don't necessarily need to.
Yeah, I like the idea of putting a kid into flag football before tackle football so that they can learn the fundamentals of pass coverage and pass concepts before they get to tackle to, reduce the chances of a traumatic brain injury at that age. That's something that, like, if I were to have a kid right now. That would be my plan, and then put them in the tackle in high school. But what's the biggest misconception you still run into, even now, about concussions and subconcussive hits?
I think there's been a big scare around CTE because we see a lot of cases in the news with chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That's what CTE is. It is a neurodegenerative disease. And I think it is a very serious disease. And we're seeing professional athletes, mostly football players, but we're seeing it in hockey players now too. We're seeing it in people who have served in the military, seeing it in boxers, rugby players, and some soccer players, I believe, as well. And the idea, I think a lot of people think now is, one or two concussions and they are exposing themselves to, they may panic and think that they may have CTE down the line in their life. When what the research is currently showing is that it is likely due to that accumulation of head impacts over a long career. So I think the big takeaway there is a way that we can help reduce that or prevent that is reducing those number of head impacts early on, like we've been talking about with young kids especially, so that by the time they get to their end of their university career and maybe they are going on to pros, the pros, they don't have that, they're not averaging 2,000 head impacts over a season. Instead, it's much lower because their coaches have been protecting them by conducting practice sessions in specific ways as young athletes, and then into their older days, also working on technique where they aren't engaging their head in a tackle, or they're protecting it in a body check, or maybe they aren't the ball is being played on the ground more in soccer and they're not heading it as much. So all of those, it's the small factors that can all can kind of all add up in different ways. But I think the takeaway is that CTE is certainly preventable, and it doesn't fall on one single person. It's the athlete, it's the players, it's the coaches, it's the support and training staff, it's the organizations making those policies. Everyone can play a role in that, as long as they're focused on health of the player, health of the athlete, and their continued development in the sport. Thinking too that not everyone is playing sport to go on to the pros. Some are playing sport for the love of playing sports, to be social, to just be active. So those are the people who I think it has the biggest effect on. When you think it's only a less than 1% of the population that goes on to play professional sports, but there's still millions of other people playing sports well into their older age, and we want to make sure that they are still able to do so. They can feel like they're doing it safely, and they can continue to do so to improve the quality of their lives.
Now, finishing up with some future and big picture stuff, what's next for your research? What are you working on right now?
We've got a few irons in the fire, I guess. We've done some interesting look at early on in flag football, because it is such an exploding sport, and it's great to see. So we've done some work in youth elite flag football, looking at injuries as well as head impacts in the sport, especially because it's an Olympic sport come LA 2028. And I also believe U Sport just announced it as an official U Sport.
2027.
Yeah, 2027. Okay. Which I think is really exciting. So yeah, we've done some work in flag football. We've done some work in wrestling. So kind of my area of research, I want to look at some of those less examined sports. Football, hockey, even soccer and rugby have gotten a lot of attention because they're naturally collision sports, or in soccer, just using your head to head the ball. But there are other sports that still have a lot of exposure to head impacts and high concussion rates that haven't received some of that same, I'd say, popularity in research. So, we conducted a systematic review looking at injuries in cheerleading, We've done some work collecting head impacts in wrestling. Some future ones may be looking at diving and the sport of diving and when they enter the water. And then flag football, as I mentioned. So it's those other sports that don't get the same attention. They may not be as not have as many participants in it, but they're still, those athletes still have the potential for injury, but also preventing that injury. So seeing what we can do to widen that scope, and then a specific look at female sports too, because there's a very large lack or inequity in research being conducted on female head impact or concussive athletes compared to males.
Last one, since Suns Out Stangs Out is a summer sports show, I want to ask what you've been up to this summer and what your plans are for the rest of August for both your work life and non-work activities you've got on your plate.
Yeah, this summer I've kind of been in and around Canada at a few different conferences presenting some of our work, which was really great experiences to see. Places like Calgary and Vancouver, lovely cities in Canada, and so that's from a work perspective, and then from a personal perspective, just getting outside and enjoying sometimes the nice weather, sometimes avoiding, whether it's smoke or smog, but just in general appreciating that we have such lovely nature in and around the area, kind of no matter where you live in Canada. So getting to experience that in different ways, that always helps me reset. So, yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Jeff, for being on the show today. And I'm excited I look forward to seeing more of your work making sports and athletes safer in the near future.
Thank you very much for having me, Alex. Appreciated chatting with you.
That's all for this episode of Suns Out Stangs Out. Big thanks to former Western football player Jeff Brooks for stopping by. I'm Alex, telling you to keep the heat up and the hooves running. We'll catch you next time on Radio Western.